On applying a network layer moving target defense to secure static nodes in a mobile-enabled system. I'm from Virginia Tech. So anyway, this is just sort of a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today, why we need to secure these, what are moving target defenses, and then sort of comparing and contrasting the heterogeneous and homogeneous moving target networks after the application of MT60, and then just some conclusions and engineering principles. So mobile devices are obviously becoming more prolific. That's sort of the point of this whole thing. Mobile users need to get information from the network, and users need to get information from a mobile network. It sort of works both ways there. You have all these sensor networks that are gathering and reporting potentially very sensitive information that you might not want falling into the wrong hands. It's sort of the other side of that coin of how do we get everyone to use this? Well, how do we not get people that we might not want using this to use this? And the organization of your network has a pretty big impact on what you consider to be critical. If you have a bunch of mobile users walking around who are just connecting into a central server, that might not be a huge deal if any individual end user is compromised. But if that central server that they all use to coordinate becomes compromised, that could be a pretty big problem. So a moving target defense is just a mechanism where a node can constantly change its attack surface. This forces an adversary to expend more time, resources, energy, money, manpower, etc., to repeatedly acquire the target and try to exploit it. Whereas without a moving target defense, they could just locate the target and repeatedly hammer away at it using different methods. We just try to minimize the window of attack. And it can be applied both offensively or defensively. And just here are some examples. The one that most people and most software people are familiar with is ASLR, which is used to combat buffer overflows by changing where locations in memory are loaded. So in my lab, we've been doing a lot of work with moving target defenses in the network layer. And one thing that we sort of noticed about mobile-enabled systems is that the mobile nodes actually have a lot of the properties that we've been creating with this network layer moving target defense. They move around, they change their addresses rapidly, but you generally are able to address who you need to. They're all moving around. But if we notice here, in the center of this sort of contrived network, there's a central service that they all might be connecting to. And an adversary who's outside of this network and is just able to monitor traffic can notice a bunch of people talking, but there's this one fixed point in the network that a lot of people are communicating with. And he can infer that that's a very important node in the network. A lot of research has actually been done in doing this sort of network analysis as it applies to botnets, which is where we got a lot of the inspiration for this. So MT60, the moving target IPv6 defense, is a network layer moving target defense system developed at Virginia Tech that utilizes the immense and sparse IPv6 network address space and the ability that nodes in IPv6 are allowed to assign their own addresses because it's so sparse. Well, what we've been able to do is let nodes rapidly change their address on the order of once every second, while maintaining a consistent flow of communication between nodes. This does rely on key distribution, so it is an internal only system, but there are a lot of networks where that's an acceptable detriment. And one thing that helps a lot of people get this is it's sort of analogous to frequency hopping, but in the IP space. So if we apply this to a mobile network, you sort of see everything's moving around. It's difficult to say, okay, well, this is a mobile node and this is a central coordinated node, because everything's rapidly changing their addresses, and you can't just say, okay, IP A is talking to IP B, and that's a flow that we can see over time. And, oh, look, IP C is also talking to IP B. Maybe this is a central service. So it's much harder for the adversary to infer any information about the network through these relationships. So just to quickly go through what we did here, it's important that we sort of secure these mobile-enabled systems looking at the larger picture of the system and not just the individual mobile nodes. And these mobile-enabled networks do have many of the properties of a network MTD. But an adversary who understands the network but is outside of it can analyze the network and look for static nodes that don't have these properties. So you have to explicitly apply a network MTD to the system to create a homogeneous outside, ever-changing attack surface so that the attacker can't find a single node to hammer away at. And then just some of the breakout thoughts here. Security shouldn't just be an afterthought. We shouldn't add security to a system. Everything that you do can be used against you, so how would I attack this component of the system? And then IPv6 is sort of the future here. That's something that we've learned through doing this. It's more than just a different address format, and there are a lot of things that, if we can give every single moat in a moat network an IP address that's globally routable, that opens up a lot of possibilities. So I think there's a lot of research that can be done into applying IPv6 to these mobile networks. So any questions? Yes.
So how do you ensure randomness? Like, so for example, an adversary can look at the traffic for a good amount of time, and if it's not completely random, then they can use, like, identify the pattern, and then they can.
So
kind of
the way that the addresses are calculated, it's a deterministic but unpredictable method. We use hashing along with the key and the internal addresses that are assumed to be known to the endpoints. So at any end and a timestamp at which we want this communication to occur, so when a packet is sent, it has a given timestamp, that the addresses for that communication are based on the source address, the destination address, the key, and the timestamp. So if you don't have the key, it's not feasibly possible to calculate the address, or you've broken, well, in our case, SHA-2. So.
Just one question. Yeah. Do you think it will impact those G2D auto-discovery networks? So device just plug and play, they learn the addresses and create ad hoc networks on the fly. This security will create more problems for that network.
So this would definitely sort of create more problems for that because it does rely on key distribution beforehand. So if you don't have any way of getting the key or being given the key, then you can't really join a network like this. But if you're, say, distributing devices to, say, volunteers, you could pre-configure them with these keys, and then this could be applied to that.
So you said IPv6 was the future, and I would have to agree with you. Does it make it better or worse from the purpose of what you're doing?
Much better.
Much better?
It alleviates a lot of problems, especially that we've tried to deal with the lack of IPv6, NAT, CGN. These are going to cause problems in the future where you have devices that can't talk to one another without punching holes in CGN devices at the ISP. One of the nicest things about IPv6 is because you have so many addresses, we can assign globally routable addresses to nodes, and they can talk to each other without any of this problem.
I guess one more thing. There's a big trade-off when you use key distribution, because you have to distribute the key. I mean, so it inhibits things like do anything ad hoc is almost impossible, because if you don't have the key, and just the fact that you have to distribute it, it can get lost. All the things that go with it. Just because it applies to mobs in general, are you guys looking at any way in better key distribution methods, or is that a part of your research at all?
We haven't really been trying to solve the key distribution problem. We assume that there is some sort of pre-channel that you can securely distribute keys across, but I mean that's the one big question in symmetric crypto is how do you deal with the keys?
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.